Good afternoon. This is Quiet News, bringing you news with less noise. The big story this January has been that Republicans required 15 votes in order to determine the House Speaker. This has not occurred in 100 years. During the period of retrying the vote, no members were able to sit for the regular duties of the House. They were unable to pass rules. With nothing able to proceed, news coverage has somewhat slowed. The vote was stymied by 20 Republican holdouts identifying with the Freedom Caucus. Alternative speaker candidates proposed by this group included Donald Trump and Jim Jordan. Over the course of the 15 votes, some negotiations transpired between the holdouts and Representative McCarthy. Important concessions included the return of a rule that would allow representatives to initiate a vote to vacate the speaker, possibly removing McCarthy at a later date. Other new rules established additional investigative committees, raised the vote threshold for tax increases, and changed the budgetary calculations for tax cuts. A noteworthy rules change was the addition of term limits for the House Board of Ethics that will force all but one of the Democrats on the formerly bipartisan committee to retire. Staff hiring for the board has also been limited to the first 30 days of a new Congress, making it unlikely that the board will be able to fully staff in a time where congressional ethics investigations are looming. It's the season for New Year's resolutions, and if you're working on something, I'd like to impart some vital advice. Anything worth doing is worth doing halfway. This may not apply to home renovation, but for efforts like cleaning or fitness, any progress is better than none. If you've got a project that seems insurmountable, break it down into bits and focus on little bits. It's fine to stop halfway. You can focus on the part of the glass you've filled. Shifting to international news, Ukraine armed forces killed at least 89 Russian soldiers in an artillery attack in the occupied Ukrainian town of Makiivka. Ukraine is claiming as many as 300 kills in this strike. Either way, it marks the deadliest attack against Russian forces since the start of the war. Russian generals are blaming cell phone use for revealing the position of these forces. In Brazil, supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro stormed 3 buildings on the 8th, the Brazilian equivalents of the Capitol Building, White House, and the Supreme Court. However, because this was done on a weekend, the buildings were largely empty, with newly elected President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva being out of town. The Brazilian government has since reclaimed control of the facilities. President Lula has decried these invaders as terrorists and begun investigations to round up all of those responsible, with 1,200 reportedly under arrest as of Monday. Jair Bolsonaro left Brazil for Florida on the second-to-last day of his term and remains there currently, hospitalized regarding abdominal pain, also as of Monday. Democratic congressmen have called for the removal of Bolsonaro from the U.S., but there's been no comment regarding Bolsonaro from President Biden as of the writing of this script. In cultural news, a few content creators and newscasters identifying with the political left became embroiled in a discussion last week regarding the left's ability to speak to issues affecting young men. Thought leaders on the right have been very aggressive in courting disaffected or alienated young men, so the origin of this discussion was about the efficacy of the left, or the lack thereof, in appealing to that group. Regarding the treatment of young men by the left, there are very toxic people who have adopted the phrasing of men's rights or men's issues and use those labels to promote misogyny. This type of discourse has poisoned the well, creating a false opposition between women's rights and men's mental health. The pandemic has pressured many people into isolation and alienation from society, partly because of the physical distance, but also because of economic stresses. A pipeline has developed that aims to snare isolated young men with self-help advice, offer them overly simplistic solutions, and then cast a lot of blame in general, promote a fascistic sort of worldview. I think there's a lot of room to talk within the phrasing of men's health, men's mental health especially, but I also think that a lot of the stress that's being talked about with reference to young men is due to preconceived notions of what manliness is or what men are supposed to be like. The public perception of masculinity is often associated with confidence and power, and for people who are lacking in either confidence or power, that becomes a compounding stressor. It's a vicious cycle of self-criticism. In other news, Congressman George Santos was found to have lied regarding several personal details in the course of his political campaign. Newly elected, after the election, it was found that he had misrepresented his education, work history, the work history of his mother, and the day of his mother's death. State-level Republican officials in New York urged Representative Santos to resign on Wednesday. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has said that he not only will resist calls to push Mr. Santos out, but that he planned to seat him on a congressional committee, stating, I quote, "The voters elected him to serve. Mr. Santos has to answer to the voters, and the voters can make another decision in 2 years." Oof.